Welcome back to the Alec Lewis Show. I am your host, Alec Lewis. This is episode 37, coming off the Arizona Cardinals game. A victory, 23-22. It was, as these things usually go, mayhem, absurd, but the Vikings pulled it off. First, before we get going, I want to give a shout out to our presenting sponsor. That is First Resource Bank. Introduced them a couple podcasts ago. If you missed that, First Resource is a locally owned bank. Phenomenal people over there that run the thing. Tim Siegley has been with them for a long time and been in banking for a long time. His son Aaron and Charlie Anderson over there, those guys are really good people. They have a great platform that can be used for any of your local banking needs. And so I really recommend checking those guys out. They're huge Vikings fans. They go to games. Charlie was at this game this past Sunday, had his family out there. And I know they had a phenomenal time watching what I'm sure was a stress test, as it was for all you guys listening to this. But want to give them a shout out. That is our presenting sponsor, First Resource Bank. For more information, you can find them down below. Second, if you don't know me, I'm Alec Lewis. I cover the Vikings day to day for The Athletic and theathletic.com. I have been working in this beautiful facility that you can see behind me is the TCO Performance Center. I was writing earlier a story about Sam Darnold, which I will talk about in a bit. If you missed it last week, wrote a feature about Cam Akers. Got a bunch of other stuff coming for you down the pipe. Obviously, a very interesting week with the Atlanta Falcons coming to town and Kirk Cousins being their quarterback for now, being here. It's going to be a really fascinating one. So we're going to have more at The Athletic later this week that I think you guys will enjoy. So please go check that out. I guess I'll give some quick thoughts on that game Sunday before I go further. But it was a tough one, tough sledding. That first half was hard to watch. I mean, that's one of those first halves where you're sitting up there in the press box and you're starting to look for popcorn, candy, anything to keep your juices going. And I'm sure for you guys watching at home, it's one of those where you're putting the remote down pretty hard. You're looking over at your son or daughter or mother or father. We've seen this story so many times before, both in terms of the offensive lulls in the first half, and then obviously the stress test that I already said was obviously the comeback down the stretch. So crazy game. And I first and foremost, a couple things. One, Trey McBride, that Cardinals tight end. If you listen to Craig Morgan, who we had on the show last week, he was very effusive in his praise, and I thought it was pretty easy to see why on Sunday. That guy as a tight end can do it both ways. He is as dynamic of a pass catching tight end probably as you're going to find across the league. It's very underrated, but I think he has 69 catches or more than that already this year. And then he can block in the run game. It's why they use so much multiple tight end sets that they do. But that guy really impressed me. And then that entire Cardinals staff. But for Jonathan Gannon kicking that field goal late as opposed to going for it and trying to win the game, which I heard is the goal. I really thought their plan defensively, Nick Rallis, who's a Minnesota native, is from here, had been here, and then Jonathan Gannon, who is a defensive coach, what they put together was just it was almost like very Flores-esque, not in the sense that they just line guys up on the line of scrimmage and bring pressure, but they were bringing pressure from all over the place. And I'll get into this in a little bit later. And one of you guys asked a question about the pass protection unit and kind of what happened. But what they were putting four guys to a side. They were bringing guys that looked like they were playing cornerback. Budda Baker he reminds me of Harrison Smith in that he's so deceptive. You see him drop down to the box and you're like, is he about to blitz? Is he playing like an underneath zone? Is he about to go run and play the deep half? And he's so athletic to where he can do all of that. So the way they use those pieces, and honestly, I don't think it's the most talented defensive group. Sean Murphy-Bunting, the cornerback, I thought played a pretty good game. Their pass rush, it looked great on Sunday because of the amount of pressure and blitz packages that got home. But in general, their pass rush is not like that formidable. So I thought the plan they had, and then offensively, I thought they did some good stuff. Like they ran some counter plays with multiple pulling guards, and just tried to attack the Vikings vertically, and we're able to do it a couple times. So just all in all, I mean, it's one of those games that, like, I feel like I've covered 15 of them in the 3 years that I've been here, where it is just how were they able to piece this thing together in the end? But I mean, I say that, and I also don't want it to make it sound like they're just pulling rabbits out of their hat the way that at times in 2022 it really did feel like that. Like this team, I mean, it was pretty clear to me that on Sunday they definitely were getting beat, but they have more talent than the Cardinals do, and so for them to make adjustments the way they did, I mean, I also think that is a core tenet of what makes this staff as good as it is. It is the culture and the amount of fight that these guys show, and the belief that they have, no matter how much they're down. It is like the scheme and the places guys are put in and how effective they are in those places. But then it is also like the ability of both Kevin O'Connell and Brian Flores to adapt on game day. And I really think, like, you know, halftime adjustments are always so interesting because it's such a brief window, and so much of these plans that these teams go into a game with are so curated. Like they have practiced these 40, 50, 100 play, whatever it is, for each given week. And those are the plays that you know how to run, so that's what you run. So rarely can you just go on the whiteboard like you can in basketball and draw up some kind of out of halftime break. It doesn't really work like that. But this staff makes it sometimes seem like it can work that way, and that is a testament to them. I'm going to give 5 thoughts the way I usually do early in the week. And then, but before I do that, actually, I'm going to take some questions that I got from you guys on Twitter. So if you have not, please follow me on Twitter at Alec_Lewis. I toss out kind of a place to send some questions over, usually once a week. And when I get those, sometimes I'll just rip those off at the beginning of these Mondays because it's really fun to hear from you guys, what you guys are interested in, what stood out to you from the game, and then maybe what I can provide directly to you guys based off that. So I'll just start with the questions, then we'll get into my 5 thoughts, which deal with the game and also apply going forward. First thought, Ryan at Smart Guy Ryan, he asks, how will this cornerback room shake out if Stephon Gilmore is out? So earlier today, Kevin O'Connell talked about Stephon Gilmore's hamstring injury, which happened late in the first half. He went to the medical tent, then he walked into the locker room. At the beginning of the second half, he did come back out, and he was with Tyler Williams, who's the executive director of health for this team, player health and athletic training, that type of stuff. Tyler Williams was watching Stephon kind of jog back and forth on the sideline, and ultimately it seemed like after that they decided that he would no longer play in the game. If you weren't aware, you probably started to recognize it as the Cardinals were attacking Fabian Moreau down the field. I mean, they tried Fabian Moreau deep. They tried him over the middle. Fabian Moreau is a guy the Vikings signed late, maybe not late, but in the middle of training camp after the injury to Mekhi Blackman. And obviously with all that they dealt with at that position, he was a veteran guy that they brought in as a potential depth option who was obviously relegated to the bench once they signed Stephon Gilmore. But I got to tell you, like, even in training camp, and I wasn't recording this podcast in training camp, but if I had, there would have been a day where the first day he was out there, and it was the first day out on the practice fields right out behind us, like not too far away. He looked pretty solid that day. And I thought Sunday, I got to tell you, like, yes, the Cardinals were attacking him, especially when he was lined up across from Marvin Harrison Jr. And yes, he was flagged. I mean, the down the field one, I felt like that was more obvious. The over the middle flag that he was penalized for, I felt pretty ticky-tack but I mean, in this league, and I've talked about this in the podcast, like, you can, any given flag, it feels like you can litigate that stuff, and sometimes they see it and sometimes they don't. There's never really a rhyme or reason why sometimes it's called and why sometimes it's not. But the point is, I thought Fabian Moreau, for the most part, held his own. You know, I believe he's 30 years old, but he looked athletic enough to stay with these guys. And Brian Flores obviously was not totally afraid with him on the field because he was calling man coverage at the highest rate that they've called it this year. I believe the Vikings played man coverage like 51% of snaps against the Cardinals. Now, part of that was probably because the Cardinals receiving core is not a bunch of burners or separators. Obviously, Marvin Harrison Jr. can be that guy. I'm sure he will be even more of that guy down the road. But, I mean, for the most part, it didn't feel like Stephon Gilmore's absence and Fabian Moreau's inclusion prevented Brian Flores from playing man coverage. And again, I thought Fabian Moreau, for the most part, was athletic enough and had enough wiggle and hip swivel and all those football terms that you guys hear and know and love, I'm sure. I thought he had enough of that to be able to hold up for the most part. And then, I mean, the question, Ryan, was about how the quarterback room, I really thought Shaq Griffin probably played his best game. Now, he had the game-sealing interception, so maybe that sticks in my mind. But I thought even when Kyler Murray made some really ridiculous throws on third down, they were over the top of cornerbacks who were draped all over the Cardinals receivers. And at some point, like, and Brian Flores says this all the time, it's like at some point you just have to tip your cap to the opposing team and the way they're playing and the way they're operating. And I felt like there were throws, especially early in the first half, where Kyler was putting the ball so far extended beyond what the cornerbacks could maybe do that otherwise I was pretty impressed. Byron Murphy Jr., I feel like he's had, without a doubt, his best year since he's been here. A year that is good. I mean, it's a contract year, of course. Shout out to the late Therese Paylor, who would always talk about contract years, and Therese was just a legend in this business and a rising star, and so it's I just feel like I should give him a nod, but he was always on the contract year, and Byron Murphy has had a year that will put him in good position in free agency this upcoming offseason, whether the Vikings end up paying him or another team. I really think he's had a good year, and that showed again Sunday. So, I mean, how will the cornerback room shake out? You know, I really think you're going to have to see it against better receiving cores, and I believe the Falcons have that compared to the Cardinals. I mean, Darnell Mooney has had a heck of a year. Drake London has had a good year. Ray McLeod is pretty dynamic. Kyle Pitts as well. So they'll probably get tested right this weekend. I'd be pretty surprised at this point if Stephon Gilmore played so quickly after a hamstring, but you never know. I don't think there's any like external ad at this point where you go find some free agent, and maybe you do for depth, but I don't see any free agent at this point at cornerback coming in and having some meaningful role. So I think you're probably going to be sticking with Byron Murphy Jr., Shaq Griffin, and Fabian Moreau, and then we'll see if there's any depth behind that. Like Dwight McGlothern, the undrafted free agent, you guys have asked about him a lot going back to the beginning of me starting this podcast. And I will say internally, it feels like they are very confident and high about his potential progression. He's a very sharp guy. You see him all the time with veterans. Like there was a day after practice, I'll tell you, I remember, and I might have said this on the podcast already, but I'll never forget this. If Dwight McGlothern ends up being a guy, I'll never forget after a practice, Justin Jefferson was just throwing it around with a teammate, and he and Dwight McGlothern were going back and forth about it was like a football conversation about like, you ran this route and I did this, and Justin was explaining what he was in. Like I've said this before, I think it may be just privately to friends, but for Justin Jefferson to be taking that time to spend with a Dwight McGlothern, to me that said something. And for Dwight to even have the confidence, the balls to go up to Justin Jefferson to ask him about specifics, to me that was very interesting. So whether he gets run, it might be a long shot again at this point in the season, but it wouldn't be the craziest thing to me. So we'll see. I mean, Ryan, I guess to sum it up, I don't feel like otherworldly about that group, but I really didn't either, even with Stephon Gilmore. I mean, they played a lot of zone coverage, especially early in the year, in my opinion, to minimize the reality that if they were to play man, they would probably just get exposed. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see first how long Stephon Gilmore is going to be out. Kevin O'Connell, it sounded like it would be more short term. And then B, if that trio of Byron Murphy Jr., Shaq Griffin, and Fabian Moreau can hold up in man coverage, in zone coverage, all of that. Like it was always going to be a question. Again, even with Stephon, feel like they've held the fort. And it's just another reminder for me that just given the personnel, and I know they brought in a lot of free agents, but given the personnel still overall, what this defense has done, and really the fact that you could just rely on this defense at times you really have to, I just give them all the credit in the world. Andrew Grill at Andrew Grill 7 asked, what happened to the O-line yesterday? 5 sacks, I believe, and a couple of them came from unblocked rushers, communication issues, perhaps. I think part of it, Andrew, and this is based upon a conversation I had with Blake Brandell after the game. I think part of it was just the Cardinals were showing some stuff that they hadn't showed all year. And a lot of it, as I mentioned earlier, was like forward to a side, you have two defensive linemen and then 2 off-ball players all on one side. You don't really expect them all to come. And there were multiple instances in that game Sunday where the Cardinals brought 7 pass rushers, and like coaches inside the building will say this, but it's like there is turning the oven on, and that's like bringing 5 or bringing sim pressures, and then there is like stoking the flames on the fire and putting logs on it, and like it's like putting your hand on the stove hot. I mean, there are 2 different types of pressure, and the Cardinals were really leaning into the all-out type of if you can block it up, great. You're probably not going to be able to block it up. Can Sam Darnold make a quick decision? And I think that was part of the issue. It was honestly for me in some ways pretty informative because I mean, if you guys listen to the show and if you read my work, I've been pretty critical of the interior of the offensive line, not only this year but since I've gotten here for multiple years. But I will say it was kind of the fact that Arizona's ability to get pressure was so glaring to me in some ways made me step back and think like, unless this offensive line is losing in one-on-one matchups and that happens, or unless they're struggling to run block and that's also happened this year, like they really don't get like out-schemed from a protection aspect. And I think that is a credit both to the offensive lineman, but it's also credit to offensive line coach Chris Cooper and really the Vikings offensive staff. Like I really do think as they construct some of these game plans, it starts with, okay, like how can we minimize the idea that they can attack our protection systems? And that's one of the things that Brian Flores is so great at is figuring out, okay, when we line up like this with our defenders, they like to slide their offensive line this way. So let's line up this way and then deceptively do something different based upon the way they always slide. And the Vikings seem to be able to mitigate opposing teams being able to do that to them. At least they were until this past Sunday. And so really, Andrew, to go back to your question, the answer and the problem to me was less about just like players losing one-on-one matchups or even running backs, pass protecting. To me, the issue was, I mean, a lot of the credit just goes to Arizona. And I do think in the second half, you saw the Vikings were much better against some of those looks. And I feel like, again, that speaks to the point I made earlier about adjustments. I felt like once they kind of recognized what the Cardinals were doing, and a lot of that stuff was happening on third down, they got together, both in the locker room and on the sideline, to figure out how to shore some of that stuff up. But then they also, and this is really a Kevin O'Connell thing, it felt like and it sounded like he got to a place to where it was like, okay, we got to do everything we can do on early downs not to get to that third down situation, because when we do, it becomes a serious problem. And so, like, I believe the Vikings were 1-8 on third down in that game. And so it really did feel like in the second half, it's like, we got to go tempo. We got to get first downs quickly. We got to keep this thing humming. And they did. And so that's what I'd say, Andrew. It's not my concern level in terms of the offensive line and protection is what it's always been. And that I think in one-on-one matchups, the interior is going to lose against really good fronts. And those are the types of fronts you're going to have to beat and play against in the playoffs. So that's kind of where I'm at. To me, I just more credit and I have more respect than maybe I even did going into it for Jonathan Gannon and Nick Rallis and those guys' ability to be pretty creative and to give people problems. The next question is a hard-hitting one. Beef, chicken, or pork? This comes from @justsbb4. I don't know. This guy's got we got to get a shorter Twitter tag username thing. But beef, chicken, or pork? I like all of them. I really, really do. And it really depends on like where we're going, what we're eating. Like there's a lot of qualifiers for me on the answer I'm giving. I think just generally I probably power rank those three: beef, chicken, pork in order. I love a freaking good ribeye. I was just thinking the other day, I was in my apartment, and I was pulling out some dishware. I'm looking at what I'm making something. I can't remember, maybe chili or something like that. And I saw my cast iron skillet, and I'm sitting there thinking, man, it's been a while since I've used this thing to make a good ribeye. Now, I've been pretty busy. You guys probably know this team's been on the road. There's been a lot going on. But trust me, making that ribeye is on my mind, and I'm glad you guys care a lot. Chicken, again, if I go to Chipotle tonight, it's going to be chicken. It's trusty. It's you can be confident about it. And then pork, I don't know what kind of pork you're talking. You talking bacon? I had a bunch of my burrito on Sunday morning in the press box. If you're talking shredded pork, I can get down with that too. We can go any type of way you want to go, Jacob, @just1SBB4I die. But that my power ranking, I guess, generally would be beef, chicken, pork. You guys can let me have it in the comments if you don't like that. @Carl from Lake Elmo, @Carl FRM Lake Elmo. He's always asking questions, always good questions, very curious, and he listens and he reads. So I appreciate you, Carl Johnson. Of the primary guys on expiring 1-year deals, Stephon Gilmore, Shaq Griffin, Aaron Jones, Jihad Ward, Jerry Tillery, Jonathan Bullard. Who do you think they re-sign? It's a good question. It really is. And it's something that we will talk a lot about come this offseason. But as I just read through those names, Stephon Gilmore coming off this hamstring, however long it lasts, he's going to be a year older, and probably the one it's going to get younger at cornerback. So for me, he's a hard one for me. Shaq Griffin, same way. He's an older cornerback, kind of plays a little bit of man. He's only getting older, and Kwesi and the Vikings, obviously they like youth. They don't like paying older players. I think that's borne out among watching what they do. So he's a tough one too. Aaron Jones, I think the value, obviously we're talking after a game where he had 2 fumbles, including the one that was lost and also the drop touchdown on a beautiful throw by Sam Darnold, the back right corner of the end zone. It's tough given the recency of just what happened on Sunday. But this guy's value goes beyond what he does on the field. Like there's the run game, creating yards after contact, which I feel like for the most part this year, he's done a pretty good job of that. There is what he brings to the pass game. You've seen Kevin O'Connell use him in a ton of route concepts, including the game winner Sunday, which was a beautiful play call. That was what we call in the very scheme world mesh traffic. Alec, what is mesh traffic? It is when a running back lines up in the backfield and they run through the offensive line into like a crossing route type of concept. And it was just beautiful. And then again, so there's the on the field with Aaron Jones, but then there's the inside the locker room, the bringing flowers to Kyrie Jackson's locker, the support for young guys, the void that he kind of replaced from Dalvin Cook, who left 2 years ago, who was definitely a leader in there and who was very close to Justin Jefferson. Like all that, to me, I doubt at this point in Aaron Jones' career he's going to be signing much more than a 2-year deal. At least 2-year guaranteed. And so I think that one's a possibility. Jihad Ward for me, he's another really big locker room guy. It's a possibility. Jerry Tillery, same way. Jonathan Bullard, same way, because those are low-cost options that have done and served their roles really, really well. So that's where I'd go with that, Carl, and I hope that make Makes sense. Last question here, and then we'll get to some of my thoughts. Let's see here. At got de, I don't at DSHEPECK. Talk me down from expecting the Lions to lose 2+ games and the Vikings having a shot at the North. Well, this makes me want to ask, who do the Lions play the rest of the way? I'm going to look this up. Okay. Thursday night, Lions host the Packers. Next week, Lions host the Bills. The week after that, Lions at the Bears. The week after that, Lions at the 49ers. And the week after that, the Lions host the Minnesota Vikings. So I'll tell you what I think. The Lions host the Packers. I think that's going to be a very, very tough game for them. The Packers impressed me on Thursday, which I know you guys don't want to hear, and I know it was the Miami Dolphins who don't play well in the cold, but I still think the Packers are impressive. I think the Lions win that game. The Bills, let's say the Bills beat the Lions. Lions will beat the Bears. Lions in San Francisco. San Francisco just had such a tough freaking year, and Christian McCaffrey might be done for the year. So I'll say Lions. And then that last game, I mean, I don't know. If the Vikings win all 4, then they're going to have the same and the Lions lose to the Bills, they're going to have the same record on the road in Detroit. I mean, I'm not talking you down. I mean, look, this Viking stretch is not going to be easy either. I mean, it's going at Seattle. That's not going to be an easy game. This upcoming week, I know Kirk just threw 4 picks and the narratives are going to be what they are, but this is not going to be an easy game whatsoever. So I'm not going to talk you down from it, but expecting 2 more losses. I mean, look, if the Lions lose to the Packers this week, then we can really start talking about it. So we'll see. It'll be very interesting down the stretch, very fun down the stretch. And really, I mean, think the fact that we get to have these conversations down the stretch. How fun is that? I mean, really, like whatever you thought of this year, expectations, preseason, where this thing's going, what might happen in the end. The fact that we can have divisional, can the Vikings get? I mean, that's part of the fun of this thing. So, no, great questions. Appreciate that as always. Let's get into some 5 thoughts, and we'll roll through these. I'm going to take a sip of water because we are 28 minutes into this episode, and I appreciate you guys listening. Here we go. My 5 thoughts. And if you're here for the first time and you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe. It's right below. Pretty easy. You can hit that alarm bell. It gives you notifications for when we go live. If you're listening on Spotify and Apple, any like, review, rate, whatever the heck you do over there, that'll help us out too. I'll start with Sam Darnold. And I know I've talked about him a little bit already, but I mean, what this guy's done down the stretch in the last 2 games is, for me, I mean, it's incredibly impressive. And I've been on record on this podcast and on the radio, and when I go do hits and when I write, I've said from the get-go, and it's based upon reporting I did all summer, talking to a bunch of Sam Darnold's former coaches and people who have been around him. Like, I didn't feel like you could say fairly, well, even if Sam Darnold's had success early, is he going to turn back into Sam Darnold? I have never thought that's fair, because that would mean Sam Darnold turning back into the player that had the same infrastructure around him, which is, this infrastructure is just so far beyond anything he had in New York, in Carolina. Now, I've been on record of that, but I also was very forward, even in week 1. I remember a pass that Sam Darnold, and he played well that game. I remember a pass he threw over the middle that was near, that it probably should have been an interception. And so the turnover tendency was always there, even from the beginning. And that, to me, was always probably going to intervene if things went sideways. And obviously, in that Colts game and the Jacksonville game, I mean, there were tough moments in there, but for him to respond the way he has, and then to do it in high leverage, I mean, that's really the thing for me. It is anticipation, letting the ball get, and what is anticipation? Well, that's when a player throws the ball before the receiver's even out of their break. And Sam Darnold was doing that at the end of the game Sunday in very tight windows, in the most high leverage of moments. He's been accurate. I mean, he has, like, his arm is capable of hitting a stinger 3-iron for the golf people listening to this show, where you can just rip it down the fairway with full-on velocity. And then his arm's also capable of a sand wedge where he can somehow get it up and over. And that level of arm talent is why he was picked where he was. I don't need to tell you guys that. If you're here, you are smart enough to know that stuff. But I mean, the two throws for me, the one to Jordan Addison on the sideline, I can still see it in my head from my angle on the press box. I was like, what the heck is he? Oh my goodness, he just did that. And then there was another throw to Justin Jefferson between two defenders. Again, it's 2nd and 14. You probably don't need to be getting that aggressive, but for him to be that convicted and to throw it with that much pace, with that accuracy, again, in the moments that he was doing it, that is what makes what he's done so impressive. And it is like, I mean, few guys, I think, just for him to navigate what he's navigated in his career and then to do it again this year. And then he's not the most vocal guy. The press conferences are not electric. They are not. But just his willingness just to go to work and to really just like stick to the cliches that he always gives in the press conference, like you give him a lot of credit for that. So that was just, my first thought. The second, after the game, I think I tweeted, like, it always has to be insane, doesn't it? And it was a reference to just the one-score games and how close all these things seem to be. And I was on Monday morning before I'm recording this. I was just like looking around on some of our databases, and I was thinking, one-score games. Everyone's talking about one-score games. So how many one-score games are there? Like, I legitimately just started. My curiosity is I'm getting coffee and getting my morning going, and that's where my mind was. So I looked it up on True Media, which is this awesome database analytics thing that we've got. I don't know how they do it, but they do it. And there have been 388 games played this year, okay? 388 NFL games. 307 of those 388 have been decided by 8 points or less. That is 80%. So, and I looked at last year, and it was like, if you include last year, it's been 78% of all NFL games are decided by 8 points or less. So the reality is, as maybe unintuitive as it is, the one-score game, that's the game. That's the construction of this NFL with this salary cap and with this structure and with these rules and with these talented players. Like, that's what it is. And so really my response, and maybe you guys' response as well, of like, why does it always have to be this way? I think the reality is, like, we should go crazy when it's not that way. When the Vikings host the Texans and beat them 34-7. Like, that is like, holy cow, what a freaking outlier. And I believe, if I'm right, 3 or 4 of the Vikings wins this year of 10 are by more than 8 points. So it's almost like the Vikings are beating the odds that seem very kind of foreign to just what should be the case. And so I guess my overall point with that is, like, the stuff that matters, given the current construction of the NFL, it is players making plays at the right times. It is coaches making the right decisions at the right time. It is stealing extra yards on special teams. Like, Bill Belichick talks about this all the time on his podcast, on the Manning cast. He will always mention, like, there are hidden yardage in these 16-yard returns and downing a punt at the right way. Like, all this stuff, all these minor edges, the challenge flag that wins, the challenge flag that you didn't throw so you can save the timeout. When you call timeouts, are you wasting a timeout on second down, or are you taking a penalty to keep that timeout for later, which all of the research says you should do? Like all that stuff to me is just only magnified given the state of the NFL right now. And really, like, I hear all the time, and I've talked about it on the podcast, Kevin O'Connell's play calling. Why does it always have to be downfield passing? Can he run the ball more? All this stuff, like, I think there's validity to hearing out this stuff and to talking about it and to marinating in it for sure. But rarely that I can think of in Kevin O'Connell's first whatever many games that he's been here, can you really say, like, really you threw that challenge flag, or really you called that timeout? Like he has managed this stuff pretty well. And I think that's a testament to Ryan Cordell, his game management guy. I think it's a testament to the staff in general and the continuity of it. But given the way this league is kind of constructed now, like I think more should be there should be a credit to coaches that make the optimal situations to give their team the most minor edges. Like that stuff really matters. That's why some coaches get fired for it. But yeah, so and I think like with Kevin again, and I've said this so many times. I've given so many reasons why I think he has been as successful of a head coach as he's been. But there is like, it's not just an awareness of room, but it's awareness of game. Like do you feel like, again, we can litigate momentum? Is it real? Is it not? But when you're in that position, you have to kind of feel the game out. And it's almost like you're driving a car and there's like certain hills and you're driving a stick shift. I've never driven a stick shift, so this analogy is probably terrible. But if it's not terrible, you got to know what gear to be in. And I think like that is the head coach's role. He talked about, Kevin O'Connell did, against the Jaguars, he had to gear down. And it's like, we cannot put the ball in harm's way because we can win this game with field goals. On Sunday against the Cardinals, they had to gear up because it's like, if we don't get aggressive here, we have no chance of winning this game. And so I think one of the sneaky skill sets that a head coach in the NFL right now has to have, it is like, do you have an awareness of the levers you have to pull in game in terms of strategy? That stuff is hard to kind of ascertain unless you have a lot of sample size of it. And I feel like with Kevin, we do, in terms of just, again, how many times can you think where you're like, what are you doing throwing that flag, calling that timeout? Like it feels pretty rare. Third point I want to mention, there's this Aaron Jones block late in the game on the TJ Hawkinson play over the middle that was called pass interference that led to the game-winning drive. The Cardinals blitzed, I believe, 7 players. And Aaron Jones just sticks his hat in the middle of the offensive line, picks up the linebacker, almost tackles him. I mean, Aaron Jones has been really good in pass protection. It never gets talked about. It's not sexy. It's not on the highlights. But to do that in that situation, given what had happened for him in the game, to be willing to just sacrifice his body, knowing how important the play was. And to me, that's everything that Aaron Jones is. And to me, that's everything that this Vikings team is. And I go back, I think you can find this. If you go back to my first ever podcast on YouTube or on Spotify or on Apple, wherever you guys are listening, I'm pretty sure one of the first podcasts I did, it may have been the first one, I said, if we're looking back at the end of this year and this Vikings team has overachieved, I think we will talk about this vibe that you got. And it was kind of like a motivated to prove that the players were motivated to prove that they weren't given enough credit individually and collectively. And I know you can say that, it's cliche. You can say it for a lot of teams in sports, but you just felt it emanating from this locker room over the spring and summer. And I thought Aaron Jones maybe captured that more than anybody else. And so, again, I know it was a really tough game for him Sunday, but if you go back and look at that throw to TJ Hawkinson that was flagged, and you look at the intensity and the passion and the intentionality with which Aaron Jones blocked on that play, I think it tells you everything you need to know about that guy, where his head's at can be in the face of adversity, and then just this team in general. Segueing to another player on the other side of the ball, Jonathan Grenard, he was sick Sunday. You guys probably didn't know. I didn't know until after the game. But this guy, I mean, in terms of, I don't know what the sickness was, but he was feeling it throughout the entire course of that game. And for him to be as relentless as he was, just it's another data point to a season that should be getting talked about more nationally. He has 60 pressures, which is the most in the NFL. Among all the guys with the most pressures, he's dropped into coverage more than any others. His body type is so interesting. He's not rocked up like Danielle Hunter, but he's not light, but he's kind of flexible, slithery. He kind of feels rubbery watching him play. I know that's a weird comment, but that's just what came to my mind. So yeah, for him to do what he did again, for him to have done what he's done all season, I mean, you can't credit this guy enough. And then, again, my fifth point was just to hit on the in-game adjustments again. I was having a conversation with a player after a game early this year. I'm not going to say the specific one because they may or may not play again, and this will maybe factor in. But the player was kind of saying to me, like, they were thinking about in-game adjustments almost like when to sell a stock and when to buy a stock. And so the explanation was like this. We've had a couple successful possessions, but we know on the other side they're going to make adjustments. So when do you sell the stock ahead of time? Do you switch your defensive structure, your defensive play calls before while it's working, or until you've already gotten exposed? And again, this goes back to the coaching field thing I talked about. But I think the best coaches have a sense for when they have to adapt in game. And again, it's not just when things are going wrong. It's when things are going right, but you feel like the other side's going to adjust. And so can you get ahead of them by making the adjustment that they would not expect you to make? That is what I think has partly been why Brian Flores has affected these opposing offenses so much. And to me, like, it's a very interesting way to think about adjustments beyond just you start to struggle, guys are running on you, you need to adapt. Like, it's not always like that. It is we see what they're doing, but they may change. And so let's change before they do to counteract that. I think, like, it's always who holds the pen last type of thing. You hear that all the time when covering this league. But for me, like, I was just thinking, I've thought about that conversation a lot, and I've thought about adjustments a lot, because I feel like it is partly what has separated this staff and has spurred this 10-win start. So those are my 5 thoughts. They're a little out there. There's nothing too crazy, but it was fun. It was fun for me to do, fun for me to answer questions, just like we do every single week here on the Alec Lewis Show. We'll be back later this week, hopefully with a couple guests. I've got some stuff lined up, no promises, but I think you guys will enjoy it. So if you're new to the YouTube channel, please subscribe. That helps us out. More people will see it. If you're new listening on Spotify or Apple, come back later this week, Wednesday, Friday. We got some more for you here at the Alec Lewis Show. Again, thank you to our presenting sponsor, First Resource Bank. The link to their website and to information regarding their local branches is down below. Tim Siegley, Aaron Siegley, Charlie Anderson, you guys, the best and phenomenal Vikings fans, as good as they come. So, appreciate all of you guys listening. We will be back later this week. That is episode 37 of the Alec Lewis Show.